Hi, everybody, and welcome once again to our Community-Centered Development Foundations mini course. So today, the principle that we are going to be talking about is called the relational principle. So I'll just read that for you here right now. Strong and dynamic linkages between people in the community, both formal or informal, are the building blocks necessary for positive community change. So this principle is all about connecting. We often talk about the CCD process being an ongoing process of discovering, connecting, and mobilizing. And this particular principle really takes a closer look at the power of relationships and the power of connecting. Now, we've talked earlier in other videos that we've done with you about the goal of community functionality. We want our communities to be enabling health, assuring security, stewarding ecology, shaping local economies, growing local food, raising our children, and co-creating care. We really often focus on those things. And if those things are, and those community functions are the purpose of our community, what is the power behind it that actually drives this purpose? We would like to propose that relationships are the power. Think about it a little bit like a bike. If the function of a bike is to get from A to B, then the power for the bike to do this comes from the act of pedaling. In the same way, building nourishing relationships is like pedaling a bike. It's the power that we need for community building and community functionality. But what is it about relationships that are so powerful? One of the ABCD or asset-based community development thought leaders named John McKnight, he breaks this down into three elements of this power of relationships. The first element is the power of people sharing with one another. They're sharing their resources, their time, their gifts, their talents. And this power is all about generosity, mutuality, which is kind of like being allies with each other, and reciprocity, which is all about giving and receiving. So that's the first element. The second element is the power of people connecting with one another in different ways. These are things like being in clubs, going to church with each other, work, teams, associations. And this power is activated through working together and playing together. Relational bonds are strengthened when we find points of connection or things that we share in common with each other. The third element is the power of welcoming, people welcoming each other, inclusivity. It's eager to learn from each other and receive from others. It's about welcoming different cultures, genders, abilities. And this power, it becomes alive through hospitality, vulnerability, and strengthening communication. And often when generational conflict is a barrier to this power, it's also about repentance and forgiveness. And that's also important to address in this element. So how do we cultivate relationships in our community? So I have a few ideas. It's just a few, and it's not an exhaustive list. But when you think about yourself as facilitators in a community, what are some things that you can do to help grow or strengthen relationships? One thing that is so important is identifying connecting type people in your community. We call them connectors. Bringing them together to dream about ways that we can connect people and groups together. These are the people in your community who are kind of like the glue. And actually, they're not usually the leaders of the community. They're sometimes under the radar or quiet, but they're the ones that are strategically, without even knowing it, almost comes naturally out of them, bringing people and groups together. Time and time again, it's been proven that when you bring connecting type people together for brainstorming or intentional conversation, that's how movements get started. Secondly, you need to create a space where moments can be made to recognize each other's potential. We need to find ways to expose the hidden or sleeping qualities or abilities that have so much opportunity to be developed, and help people to really realize how they can be useful in their community and connect those things together. And this is where discovery comes in, which we talk a real great deal about in the facilitation course. The third is making space for intentional community conversations. This is a great way to sensitize your community to community-centered approaches for development and peace building. It's just a gathering. It's not a training. It's not a meeting. It's a place for stories to be shared, for passions to be revealed and ignited, for people to get to know each other and to build a foundation, all the while exchanging ideas and forming bonds with each other. And the next two I really love. We need to create two things here: opportunities to work together and opportunities to play together. We need to work together toward a common purpose. We know that when we do challenging things together, when we work hard with each other, our bonds grow stronger. And also, the same goes for playing together. Sometimes we're so serious, but we don't realize how valuable it is to play with each other. Cooking, eating, sports, theater, sitting around a fire. There's so much that happens when we simply accompany each other in fun and enjoy each other's humanity. I really love the example of community fellowship that comes from the Christian tradition, which in the Greek is called, and I'm probably gonna not say this right, but koinonia. Is that right? Anyways,
Sounds good.
it describes perfect fellowship with attributes like commitment, generosity, and mutual loving participation for the flourishing of community. So I'm going to hand it over to Jamie to break it down a little bit further, this idea of relationships.
Hey, everyone. I want you to imagine all the people that you're in relationship with. So your whole social network, all the people in your neighborhood that you know, family members and work friends and people from your past. Think about WhatsApp and Facebook. So many contacts and people that you have had experiences with and lived your life alongside. And picture them as a spider web. And, what does a spider do without its web? Well, it's going to starve. It's got nothing to eat. It has no opportunity to survive and get ahead. And in the same way, your web of connections creates an opportunity for you. So just as a spider works hard to build its web, you've spent a lifetime building these trusting and meaningful relationships and social connections. And sometimes we know that, we know we have all these relationships, but we don't recognize the power that they have. And so some examples or categories of people that could be in these networks are family, friends, neighbors, work associates, people from religious background, clubs, teams, and you can read them there. But I want you to think about times in your community when a quick action was needed or collaboration is needed, and how you were able to mobilize people. One example that comes to mind is we have friends in this discussion group that we're working on now from Goma in the DRC who are a part of Goma Actif. And if you haven't heard about the work that they're doing, we will send a link and provide you with some information. But Goma Actif has mobilized thousands of local volunteers to respond to various humanitarian crises. And it all started with the power of social linkages. And one term that I'm not sure if you've heard of is social capital. Really, the word capital refers to money. We all know that financial capital has potential to create opportunity. That's why we want money. But there's also something called social capital. In a similar way to money, social capital creates opportunity. So the word social capital is defined as all the value and resources that are derived from our social networks. So going back to the example from Goma, they probably thought they had nothing, no way to respond to all the problems that they were facing, starting with COVID, local violence, a volcanic eruption. But they recognized through the power of their social network that they had access to resources, goods, and services right there in Goma, in the local community. So in a similar way that financial capital can purchase, can buy material goods and services, social capital allows us to get what we need and do what needs to be done. To get what we need and do what needs to be done. It is so powerful. And so what are the kinds of social capital, the kinds of resources that can come from your network of relationships? Here's just some examples. Information. The Goma Actif group, they began by just sharing information around COVID. People had heard about this global pandemic and there was fear, and what can we do about it? So they began to share information about it, risks and various responses, and information about just what is happening in your community. Provides us with opportunities, training courses, jobs, maybe things for sale that you need to buy, physical help and services. You need to fix something, build something, drive somewhere. Or in the case of Goma Actif, feed thousands of displaced children. That physical service and help was right there available through the network of relationships in the community. Material resources, bricks for building, supplies, food, medicine. And maybe the most important one is just social and emotional support, the links of mutual support, interdependency in the community that as human beings, we all rely on. I want to share this story from the Bible in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 4. And I'm going to read it and you can follow along with me. And and I think you'll see where I'm going with this as we read the story. One day, the widow of a member of the group of prophets came to Elisha and cried out, "My husband who served you is dead. You know that he feared the Lord, but now a creditor has come. He's threatening to take my 2 sons as slaves." So to cover the debt. And so there's a major crisis here that she's dealing with. Elisha says, "What can I do to help? Tell me, what do you have in your house?" "Nothing," she says. "Nothing at all except a flask of oil," she replied. Elisha said, "Borrow as many empty jars as you can from your friends and neighbors. Then go into your house with your sons, shut the door behind you, and pour olive oil from the flask into the jars, setting aside each one when it is filled." So she did as she was told. Her sons kept bringing jars, and she filled one after another, and soon every container was full to the brim. Incredible story. So what do we learn about social capital? Well, the first thing I find interesting in this story is this hugely important community-centered development question. What do you have? And so we credit Elisha as, an early practitioner of ABCD, of community-centered development, for not trying to solve the problem and asking her this empowering question, what do you have? Her response, friends, is not surprising. What is the first word? What is her response? Nothing. And so that is often the reflexive first response that people will say in your community that you talk to. What do you have? Oh, I have nothing. And then she thinks, well, there is one small jar of oil. And so that is the starting point. But what are the assets that she discovers? What were the resources that she found? Well, really it was the oil, but also her social network. It's a story about how everyone in the community comes together. So in a woman's time of need, her success depends upon what? The generosity and the willingness of the entire community, people she knows, people she's created bonds with, has a history with. They come to support her in her time of need. So the widow was actually prepared for this shock misfortune in her life because she had built up social capital. I want to take just a couple more minutes and go a little deeper into this idea of social capital. We talk about two types of social capital, bonding and bridging. So bonding social capital is what we do to survive and to get by. And when we talk about bridging, it's what we do to get ahead. So bonding, these are relationships within our shared community, people who have the same, maybe problems and frustrations, challenges. They probably live in your community. They're probably like-minded, maybe the same culture, even ethnicity, people that often we are with on a day-to-day basis, and they'll provide helpful collaboration, support in a time of need. They help to ensure security, emotional support, companionship. And so that's kind of our horizontal. We think about a line this way. We bond together with those people and they help us survive. Bridging is something a little bit different. These are relationships that cross over from our shared situation into maybe a different social sphere, a different social group, maybe people from a different location, different social class, or even race or religion, different age group, different category of work and job. So whereas bonding is a horizontal relationship, bridging is more vertical. It helps us to move up and out from where we are. And so bridging relationships provide us with different ideas, new types of knowledge that we haven't thought about, different skills, different resources to build on what you've already started, new opportunities for growth and development and getting ahead. And here's the important thing to remember, friends, is that bonding creates opportunities for bridging. And sometimes when we start and we just look at what we have as an individual or a household, we don't have the opportunity to bridge outwards to new opportunities. And yet, when we focus on what we have as a community, bonding together, time and time again, I've seen this where new opportunities, bridges to opportunities become available. An example of that comes from Myanmar. And this is a close friend of mine that I worked with for a number of years in Myanmar. And he was a solitary farmer, one man living on a small plot of agricultural land. But he had a heart to really bridge out into his community, began to work with his neighbors in the village. And he had ideas to pool their resources together so that they could try different experimental techniques. They were able to plant palm trees, which you can see in the picture here, to create palm oil. Nobody was doing that in the area where he lived. And they tried a special variety of rice that had potential for a greater harvest, higher nutrition, and many advantages to it. But nobody was taking the risk to try it. And so he even took the opportunity as a group to go get further training. With the things that they learned, they went out into neighboring villages and they offered this new rice seed and this new technique for farming. They trained them for free. And over time, they began to develop an association with this group around them for purposes of cost savings on transportation and purchasing, sharing equipment. They work together more and more. So this is still on the level of bonding together as farmers in the local villages and communities. Now, based on the number of farmers that were involved and the amount of rice that they were able to produce, they were able to create new linkages and opportunities with other organizations. So local NGOs, other training organizations from the capital city began to take interest in what they were doing. Seller cooperatives began to get involved in, and they were able to sort of start a small cooperative business, able to create revenue in what they were doing. The local government even got involved, recognizing that this was an opportunity to use land that the government had mandated. And so over time, they were able to acquire more land and ultimately created a large coffee company and many other things. But it's just an example of starting with bonding and seeing how it moves you to more opportunities towards bridging. So we've given you a real overview of social capital and the power of community and building linkages and bonding. We really look forward to giving you in the next course real practical ways to do this. But I'm going to turn it over to Kendra, and she's going to bring us one other dimension of this aspect of the relational principle.
Thank you so much, Jamie and Daniela. We're going to take a minute to talk a little bit about a dynamic that always exists when it comes to human relationships, and that is conflict. It's impossible to talk about the relational principle without acknowledging the very real presence of conflict in our interpersonal relationships, in our communities, in our community-centered development teams. Conflict is going to arise. It's a normal dynamic, and it happens at every level. So we just want to give you, as community-centered development leaders, a framework for thinking about conflict. And this is something we could take a much deeper dive into, and we will in 102, but we just want to give you a taste, a lens to view conflict through. So the concept is conflict transformation. Conflict transformation is a process that aims to address the root causes of conflict and the underlying conditions that lead to things like violence, hatred, and insecurity. Conflict transformation focuses on the structures and the relationships that create the environment where conflict can erupt, rather than just putting the focus on a specific conflict itself. Conflict transformation, I gave you 3 things to think about when you're thinking about conflict transformation. Conflict can be a powerful force for change. It can actually be positive and transformational if we're understanding conflict with this lens and if we're equipped with the tools to heal instead of harm. So conflict transformation encompasses all of that, and we will talk more about those tools in the next course. The conflict transformation principle, it invites us as leaders to consider that there's not just one solution, but many possible solutions. It invites us to get creative as we look at the root causes and all the factors that contribute to a conflict and what we could move around and get creative with to create many possible solutions instead of just one resolution. And finally, conflict transformation does assume that people in conflict view every person as having dignity and as being made in the image of God, right? So we honor human life and we want flourishing for all people, and that's key for conflict transformation to work. So if we as community leaders can believe that and internalize that and operate in that and lead our teams and communities in operating in that, conflict can be powerful and positive. I'm going to give you just a couple quick questions that you can think about when you're thinking about, actually, can you go to the other slide, the last slide, Jamie? conflict resolution versus conflict transformation? Yes. Okay, it's not quite the right one, but I'll go ahead and just go through it. Some of you may have heard of conflict resolution, right? That's a great way to think about conflict. We're taking this one step further though, and saying conflict transformation is a better approach to conflict. Conflict resolution focuses on the presenting problem. Conflict transformation is focusing on the context and the relationships surrounding the problem. I'll send you the image of this chart at the end of this call. Conflict resolution puts the emphasis on the solution or the product. Conflict transformation puts the emphasis on process of reconciliation and looking for meaningful change. Conflict resolution seeks to close the conversation around the conflict to resolve the conflict. Conflict transformation seeks to work through the conflict and continue the conversation because our relationships continue forward after a conflict. And finally, conflict resolution seeks to bring the conflict to a settlement, and conflict transformation seeks to bring understanding around the conflict to fortify relationship and fix the context so that the conflict doesn't happen again. We want you as community-centered development leaders to be aware that conflict does not happen in a vacuum. There's always something happening under the surface that's contributing to the conflict and things happening in the external atmosphere that are contributing to a conflict. So we as leaders have the responsibility to seek to understand what the root causes could be so that we can really move forward well in relationship. I'm going to share a very quick, super silly example from my marriage. Marriage is a great place to put conflict transformation into practice because we have relationship, right? We have many things shared in common with our spouse. And you can apply this to any family member, of course. So a conflict arose in my house. There was a big pile of laundry that needed to be folded. And every day I walked past it and my husband walked past it and we were thinking he should fold the laundry. He was thinking she should fold the laundry. And it started to cause this conflict. Such a silly thing, right? But of course, like this image, the presenting problem, the pile of laundry is just the top of the iceberg. But there's all these other things happening under the surface. Right? My husband and I share many things in common. We both work jobs. We have 2 small children. We have a household that we need to maintain, and that includes everything that goes into having a successful home. So the root causes could be things like understanding what our expectations are for what his responsibility is and what my responsibility is. It could be understanding what is stressful for my husband or what is stressful for me and taking into account all these other factors. And many other things could be at play too. But if we only focus in on the tip of the iceberg of the problem and don't address the underlying factors, then other small things are going to cause conflict. So this is such a silly example, but in your teams and in your community, you might see these little conflicts pop up and you might ask, like, where is this coming from? As community-centered development leaders, it's our responsibility to get curious about what is underlying so that we can respond to conflict in ways that maintain our relationships and even move us forward into deeper flourishing and authenticity in our relationships. We want to leave you with this final thought for the relational principle. Everything that we've talked about here is all about healthy relationships for thriving community-centered development work, as well as thriving communities. We believe this with our whole hearts, and we try to operate this way. We always say we move at the speed of relationship and we walk at the pace of trust. Okay, so we know that you know this is true, and we just want to encourage us all. Relationship is the foundation of everything. Healthy relationships are the key to a thriving community. And all the things that Daniela and Jamie and myself have talked about are practical ways to help maintain healthy relationships. We can't wait to talk with you guys this week and hear about your experiences, your responses to this content, and all of the wisdom you have to share from your context in your culture about relationships and how the relational principle can be powerful in practice. So bless you guys, and we will see you soon.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.